Well, speaking of new alliances in the culture war, let's move on to this Bill Maher clip. Krystal, Bill Maher had Katie Couric on Club Random this Sunday, and they got into a debate about the media. Bill Maher has sort of joined the conservative critiques of CNN and other kind of corporate media outlets that I think both of us in a lot of cases would agree with. They're biased in different directions, and they're a lot of cases selection bias, what they choose to talk about versus what they don't choose to talk about, and all of that good stuff. But it was an interesting conversation. So let's roll this clip of Bill Maher and Katie Couric on Club Random this Sunday.
Okay, remember the town hall he had on CNN about 6 months ago? And the audience loved it. The audience loved it. I mean, you can hate it.
It was stacked with Trump supporters.
Well, they said Republicans and independents. That's what they said. Okay, maybe it was. How'd they get in? If they did, that's on CNN.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is on CNN, and the vetting process was...
Well, then you got to get a better audience person.
Obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like the person who handed the gun to Alec Baldwin.
Yeah.
You know, got to get good people in all these positions.
I agree.
Okay, so if that was about, whatever, even if it was, here's what happened. Here's what people saw in America. They saw Trump killing it with the crowd. Then you come to a panel of 6 people who all just do nothing but dump on him and call him a liar. And America goes, oh, didn't you just see that we like him? And
He's
now,
not a stand-up comedian.
What?
He's killing it. He's not a stand-up comedian.
No, but popularity doesn't matter. The people loved him and what he was saying. And then you cut to a panel of 6 know-it-alls in Washington who just do nothing but talk about the negative. And like, I'm all in on the negative. No one's been harder on Trump than me. But I get it, and I'm bored with it. And there's a different way to do this, I think, which
what is it?
It's not to defend Trump, but to defend the people who still vote for him, because what they see on the other side, to them, is even more dangerous, because it's very closer to home. My kid is coming home from school, and he thinks he's a racist. He's 5. What have you been telling him? You know? My son thinks maybe he's not a boy, and maybe that's true, that happens. But, you know, those kind of are what they say, that's why I'm voting for Trump.
A backlash to the pendulum swinging so far to the left.
Conservative guy once said to me, what you don't get about Trump is we don't like him either. Now, that's not true for all people. There are people who just love his dirty draws, and they are dirty. But lots of people, it's like that. We don't like him, but he's all that stands between us and madness. That's their view.
So, Krystal, I think that's really interesting because there are a few people that have reckoned with the reality that a lot of Republican voters, again, really don't like Trump. There's like 30% of the hardcore MAGA base that actually absolutely loves him. And there's a lot of polling that puts that number around 20 to 30% of that sort of hardcore, diehard MAGA, the people who are at rallies, versus the average Republican voter or Republican-leaning independent that sort of tolerates Trump. And they tolerate Trump not because they love him, they see him as a stand-up comedian, but because, you know, that Flight 93 election essay that went really viral in 2016 by Michael Anton that was very influential in conservative intellectual circles, not probably with Republican voters, but put that into words, that the threat of a Hillary Clinton presidency because of some of those culture war questions was so big that people are willing to sort of swallow the pill of Donald Trump because they think 4 years of Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden is worse. And people can disagree with that argument, that's fine. But at least acknowledging the argument, I kind of can't believe that we're just having this conversation in a somewhat mainstream venue. I mean, it's Bill Maher's podcast. It's not like that conversation itself is happening on CNN all the way in 2024. I mean, that's what should have been understood in 2016, and there should have been people willing, you know, Katie Couric obviously wasn't agreeing with him, but there should have been people willing to even hear that argument out in 2016 instead of automatically shouting down Bill Maher as a enabler of racism or whatever else. But CNN will not even air a conversation like that. I think that's what he's talking about. There's nobody on the panel to represent that perspective, even though it's coming from a huge chunk of the electorate. You know, north of 60 million people voting for Trump in 2020, and there's no representation of that in CNN because there's no tolerance for it because, you know, a lot of the younger staffers there see it as being an enabler of racism, that it's necessarily sort of bigotry, racism, transphobia, homophobia, et cetera. So you can't even have that conversation. You can't even hear it out. And I just kind of monologued there. But I do find it frustrating that, like, he's having this conversation while smoking a joint in a shadowy sort of podcast venue when that's the conversation that should be had by the so-called mainstream press, but everyone's too afraid to even talk about it.
There's a lot to say here. So first of all, with regard to Bill Maher himself, he's been on this very noteworthy, like, rightward shift journey for years at this point. You know, he started out in 2016. He was a Bernie Sanders guy. Then in 2020, suddenly he was with Amy Klobuchar. Now most of his noteworthy comments are directed at, you know, the left and the excesses, the woke excesses of the left. He's very much consistently on that beat. So in that vein, this commentary is not, like, surprising to me at all. That seems to be where Bill Maher is at this point. That's number one. Number two, with regard to the comments about trying to put yourself in the shoes and give the most charitable reading of ordinary Americans and their motivations. Obviously, that's something I have advocated for very strongly for a long time, very consistently. I will just say Bill Maher does not show that charity when it comes to many other groups, specifically young people who he has nothing but unbridled contempt for, and the left, which he also has nothing but unbridled contempt for. So where is this supposed empathy for differing perspectives when it comes to, you know, the young people who are overwhelmingly protesting the atrocities in Gaza, or who just have a different view of the world than he does? He has no problem very consistently smearing any and all young people as stupid and foolish and lazy and ill-informed and whatever else. So if it was a consistent principle, like, I like to hear people out, I like to try to understand their perspective, think about where they're coming from, etc., these comments might land a little differently with me than coming from Bill Maher, who, as I said, is happy to smear people who he at this point sees as his biggest ideological opponents, which is those on the left. You know, he feels very comfortable doing that on a very, very regular basis. He probably did it in this same interview with Katie Couric, if I had to guess. The other thing, and this ties into the, we're about to talk about, like, some updates with NPR, and it ties into this conversation. As a leftist, I find it offensive when people assume that I'm being represented somehow in CNN or the New York Times or at NPR. Right. There is no ideological group that is more shut out of any sort of mainstream news outlet than actual class first leftists. Like, it's like we don't exist. And we're supposed to pretend like Jake Tapper is our ideological ally, or somehow our worldview is at all reflected in these corporate neoliberal spaces. And there's never any crying about where's that diversity of viewpoint. You know, this is why occasionally when, like, a Nina Turner will sneak on for one segment or something, we're all like, oh my God, it's like we exist. But otherwise, we understand what the game is, because our ideology is threatening to capital. It doesn't sit comfortably with the advertisers or, like, the donor class that at this point backs NPR. And so we're just invisibilized and, you know, casually smeared, dismissed, et cetera. And I never see any concern about that. At least conservatives have Fox News, and it's bigger than CNN. The last thing I'll say, and this really does transition us to that NPR conversation, is, like, let's just be serious about where we are in the media ecosystem at this point. These places are not trying to play to a general audience. They're corporate. They need advertiser money. They have a specific audience that they're super serving. It's a business model. It's not news. That's what it is. So we shouldn't be surprised when CNN doesn't platform my ideology or your ideology, because we aren't for the audience that they have and that they want to keep and that they're trying to super serve. We aren't for the advertisers that they want to keep buying ads. So the more that we're clear about what's actually happening here, and I think drop the pretense that this is some like neutral journalistic endeavor, I think the more easily we'll understand what's actually unfolding before our eyes at all of these various outlets.
Yeah, I agree completely that like the number one thing the media could do to improve instantly would to be quite literally just drop the pretense for the New York Times to say our editorial slant on the opinion side also guides our news side. Just drop the idea that this is the paper of record for the country as a whole. That would do so much, whether it's CNN, NPR, Washington Post. That would go so far to restoring trust in media and allow some of the genuinely brave and excellent reporting those outlets do overseas, in actual war zones, to actually build credibility back with readers that rightfully have no trust. And I'm not saying all that reporting deserves credibility, but just that, there are people that are doing some good work that the critics of media aren't doing, mostly because they don't have, the funding or the institutional infrastructure to do it. But, that's the number one thing that should start happening. CNN says we don't have people on that make that perspective of Republican voters, or that will give that perspective, that amplify that perspective, and give it anywhere near proportionality, because we disagree with both sidesism, because we're mostly cultural progressives. And that Chomsky argument that has been around for decades is important, and it was about class, it was about foreign policy and war, and now there are a lot of class-first conservatives who are also finding themselves just as ostracized as class-first leftists have been for a long time in corporate media spaces, because this is deemed out of bounds. It is beyond the bounds of what is acceptable, of what is allowed to be speech in this country. So I think it's really interesting. And let's move on to this NPR thing, because it's been a fascinating sort of turn of events. Let's put F2 up on the screen. Speaking of class, I mean, it's just so interesting here. This is Steve Guest. He posted these old Twitter posts from the new CEO of NPR, who I think got the job back in January. So she's pretty new on the job. She was saying, the best part of Arizona Get Out the Vote is my Biden grandpa hat. So she's in a Biden for president hat back on November 1st, 2020. She said in 2016, I do wish Hillary wouldn't use the language of, quote, boy and girl. It's a racing language for non-binary people. I'm an unalloyed progressive and supporting Hillary this time around, she tweeted in July of 2016. Yes, it is girl boss, like insufferable girl boss sanctimony. Matt Taibbi did a hilarious piece running down all of the time that Catherine Maher, the new CEO of NPR, was just like destroying all of the fun in holidays by like just doing this like virtue signaling political correctness. It was a really wonderful sort of journey through her political arc. But she used to be at Wikimedia. I think she's like had some like fellowships with World Economic Forum and those places. And Wikipedia is a place that a lot of people see as being sort of unbiased and neutral. It is not. We've done some reporting on the Federalist at like the horrifying levels of powerful influence over Wikimedia. I think she had positions at other sort of big corporate-friendly places before landing there. But this all has bubbled to the surface, because a guy named Uri Berliner wrote an essay for the Free Press, which is Barry Weiss's outlet, last week. And we can go ahead and put F3 up on the screen, making some pretty clear accusations of just bias that was culture-based, class-based at NPR, that he's worked there for 25 years. He just saw it escalate in recent years. For example, calling the lab leak a conspiracy theory and discrediting it immediately. Now, he was suspended yesterday. And so this happened as all of these posts from Catherine Maher were circulating. And it is pretty funny, because the New York Times, and Taibbi wrote another great piece about this, the New York Times totally dismissed and like downplayed all of the serious concerns about this woman's bias. You know, she's never been a journalist, but she is overseeing journalism at NPR, which has the added kind of credibility benefit built into it of being national public radio, a place that, you know, Ryan and I talked last week, used to be, you know, people have a lot of nostalgia for different eras of NPR, even if it used to be kind of slanted left. People liked NPR. And now, I don't know, Krystal, how often you listen to it. I listen to it a lot, and I listen to it mostly to get like the cultural progressive. I mean, they're like anti-free speech now, even though they have a show called 1A. Like, it's just amazing the turn of events at NPR, like pro-censorship on social media and all of that. So, you know, I actually think there's probably a good reason to suspend a guy who publicly airs your dirty laundry. If you're a media outlet, like that's, you know, I'm sure that's against some type of contract agreement. So I kind of get that. But I do find it somewhat interesting that you have this breathless sort of defense of Maher or protection over Maher or whatever in the media. And then this like, well, this Berliner guy, like he's getting suspended while the media is sort of defending her or rushing to her defense. It's just like, come on, guys. Like both sides can be wrong here. It's pretty clear that NPR has gone in one direction over the other.
I mean, I think this dude was pretty much asking to be fired, right?
Yes.
Like,
yes.
If you work for an outlet and you go on a different outlet and you're like, I hate this outlet I work in, here's all the problems. Like, you're kind of asking to be fired. So I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for that. I think he probably knew that was the likely outcome of his actions, and he was ready to move on for some of the reasons that he laid out. That's fine. In terms of this CEO, I don't know. To me, she seems like a perfect fit for what NPR is today.
Yes.
And if you consider the views that you put up there, you know, like I'm out here canvassing for Biden and I love Hillary, and, you know, the like language, PC language obsession stuff. How safe is that for rich people, corporate donors, et cetera?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is,
it's their
again,
new public relations strategy.
Model.
Yep.
This is their business model.
Mm-hmm.
They are not actually really public radio at this point. They receive very little funding from the federal government. Most of their budget comes from rich donors and advertisements. So guess what? You get this neoliberal ideology that is really safe for rich white people. That's their constituency. That's who they're playing to. And in that context, this CEO is an absolutely perfect fit. So I know, ironically, a lot of the response from the right of NPR's, you know, intense identitarian liberal turn is, well, we should defund them. The defunding is actually part of the problem, because the fact that the business model now is reliant on these like rich donors and advertisers is a big part of the story of how they've become what they are. You know, the original concept, if you go back to the 70s, it was this very like populist public access. We're going to talk to
utopian
Fred from
sort of
Mississippi about what's going on with his soybean crop or whatever. We're going to hear from regular Americans all around the country. I think that's very valuable. I appreciate that, like, you know, public access. I think about, remember Bernie, those like TV shows he used to do from the local mall or whatever?
Yes.
Like, that's kind of the vibe, but it's not super profitable. So if you have to actually like make money on this thing and you can't be reliant on federal government just backing you to do this thing that's genuinely like an educational or public service, then you're going to end up acting like the rest of corporate media. And we really see this, you know, we really see this turn around Trump, where he's this very divisive figure, and some media outlets go in the direction of we're going to be the Trump people, and others go in the direction of we're going to be the anti-Trump people. George Floyd is another fissure in American society. And so no one should be surprised, since NPR really is basically like a corporate media outlet at this point, that they follow the same trajectory of every other corporate media outlet.
Yeah, no, it's actually so interesting. And the last thing I'll say on this, because that the sort of Chomsky argument has been papered over by the culture war in recent years, to the point where, you know, you use the sort of necessary shorthand about liberal media or left-wing media. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I do that all the time, because there's really, you can launch into a tangential 2-minute thing about what you mean when you say that. But, you know, it's really what you mean is cultural sort of progressivism along the lines of what Catherine Maher is just displaying so clearly when she says stop using the language of, quote, boys and girls, and posts that to her Twitter page. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to even have these conversations now because the terms have been scrambled because of that culture war embrace just in the last decade or so that, by the way, stems from real class biases in ways that have been uniting to both the left and the right. And that's not to say the left and the right have found common cause on Medicare for all, so much as it is to say when you poll working class people on some of these cultural issues, like using the word Latinx, for example, you find a very different position from what the corporate media has. And I think that's one of the openings in the marketplace that you and Saagar, it's not like you were trying to, fill that gap. You just naturally do. And that's what people initially responded to. And hopefully that's what people respond to on the show is that you need media that is responsive to what people actually want to hear. And in so many cases, that is absolutely class-based. And you just don't get that anywhere, even from purportedly left-wing media at all.
Yeah. This lady does not represent me. Let me just say
yes, she does, Krystal. Yes, she does.
Not
I think you guys could be
Hillary in 2016 should
friends.
be proof of that.
you guys just need to have a glass of rosé and hash it out.
That's fine. We could be friends. I've got friends who were on Team Hillary in 2016 and were, very aggressively and still are pro-Biden. That's fine. But, she does not reflect my political ideology. And very few people in mainstream press actually do, if any, to be honest with you.
Absolutely. No, it's just the whole NPR saga has been fun to watch. And I think partially it is because I mean, I don't like the concept of state media at all, honestly, but I do like the nostalgia I like hearing people's nostalgia for the different era of NPR because I think it does harken back to a time when there was just generally more consensus. And some of that consensus was bad, but some of it actually was good. There was this touchstone culturally in NPR that a lot of people listened to and could talk about at a water cooler, the proverbial water cooler. And that was important, I think, to just a lot of our shared values.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a way public-funded media can be done well. And obviously, we need different models of media than what we've collapsed to, which is this, corporate-funded model. And then, in independent media, there are good parts about it, but it's also subject to its own risks and perils of audience capture and trying to play to narrow of an audience and in a bubble, et cetera. So definitely need a whole media rethink because I don't think these outlets are serving the American people well.
Well, speaking of platforming genuine debate that represents the actual American public, stay tuned to this channel, right, Krystal? Because Saagar is moderating one such debate tonight here on the channel at 7 p.m. on Israel.
That's right. It is going to be Saagar as moderator. We've got on one side Batya Ungar-Sargon and Dennis Prager as the pro-Israel side. And we've got Dave Smith and Cenk Uygur on the pro-Palestinian or however you want to phrase that side, pro-ceasefire, we'll say, side of the equation. So I'm excited to watch it. It should be really interesting. I always learn a lot from these things, too, on a more serious note about, the way everybody's thinking about it, and new historical facts and new things for me to personally grapple with, too, in terms of how I'm viewing the conflict.
Absolutely. And Ryan's on spring break, but he'll be back here next week for another edition of Counterpoints. And the wait is almost over. I think we can start teasing this a little bit more heavily, Krystal. There will be some new Counterpoints content coming down the pike. So make sure that you subscribe. You get the full version of Counterpoints when you subscribe right to your inbox. Not just the couple clips that we post on Wednesdays from the show, but the whole thing right to your inbox, and you get all kinds of different benefits of your premium subscription for Breaking Points as well. So that's breakingpoints.com, and I would highly recommend everybody stay tuned for next week.
Yes. Speaking of giving the people what they want, we had many, many requests, seriously, for more Ryan and Emily, and we were trying to make that happen for you good people. So thank you for your support and helping to enable that. And Emily, thank you for having me. I'll be back here again with Saagar tomorrow, so hope you guys aren't sick of me yet.
I was going to say, I don't know if you saw this, Krystal, but now Ryan and Emily, there's competition in the Ryan and Emily department because Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt are in a new movie together, and they just covered Taylor Swift's All Too Well on Saturday Night Live, and Taylor referred to it as Ryan and Emily's version. And we had some great viewer response to that, being like, this is not the Ryan and Emily that I've come to know and love. Of course, Ryan Grimm and Emily Jasinski are much more famous and iconic duo.
Of course.
But
Name a more iconic Ryan and Emily than Ryan Grimm and Emily Jasinski. Doesn't exist.
Well, stay tuned for more of that. And Sagar will be back with Krystal tomorrow. Thanks so much for tuning in, everyone.
Hey, guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.